Um, I must assume that there are some folks here who haven't been to either of the previous sessions. So what we will do is we will kind of cover the basics first of all. Okay. Um, there's still folks coming through. Please do turn your camera on if you can, and if there's a real reason not to, that's fine. But otherwise, please do turn your camera on. It makes it a little bit more sociable, for want of a better phrase. Okay, so the key points are as follows. The scheme of arrangement has been approved. So that means, to all intents and purposes, we failed to convince the judge that it shouldn't be approved, which means that, subject to there being an appeal that's successful, it means that what will happen is what the FCA and Link want to happen. In a moment, I'll put into the chat the press statement that the Transparency Task Force issued today. The press statement essentially describes why we are concerned, and we genuinely are, why we are concerned about the outcome. And it also explains that we are thinking of making an appeal. In relation to the appeal, the default position, for want of a better phrase, is that the loser would pay the costs of the other side. Because TTF doesn't have that kind of money, it doesn't have any money at all. Because TTF doesn't have any kind of money, we could not contemplate, I'm sure you'd understand, folks, taking on the risk of appealing and losing, which would, of course, mean that we would have to pay out probably tens of thousands of pounds, maybe even more, hundreds of thousands of pounds, I don't know, to the other side. So our legal team, Hock Chan and David Falkowski, are working towards exploring with the court whether there might be a possibility to have an appeal made where our costs are limited to just our own costs. In other words, we wouldn't have to pay the other sides. It's highly unlikely, for a number of reasons, that the court would agree to that, but it's worth trying. And in the process of applying for the appeal, we would have to set out our grounds for appeal. And in setting out our grounds for appeal, we are effectively stating what it is about the decision that we think is not helpful, is not right. We are still of the view that the basic argument we have had since the support of David Falkowski and Hock Chan has been available to us, we are still of the view that the basic argument that you folk that bought into Woodford Investments did so, knowing that the Financial Ombudsman Service and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme were rights afforded to you through the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000. And that, to all intents and purposes, nothing has changed. Those protections are there. So what is the basis? We are arguing that those rights should be taken away by this scheme of arrangement. We are still of the view that that argument holds water. We haven't seen anything in the judge's determination that makes us think, because of X, Y, or Z, we're wrong. In fact, there's actually remarkably little in the judge's determination to help us understand why the judge concluded that that argument doesn't carry water. All of that means that so long as we could do so on a cost risk-free basis, we would very, very much like to appeal. But it will ultimately be down to the judge whether that is the case or not, because it will be his decision whether we do or don't have this risk of paying the other side's costs covered. So in a moment, I'm going to be putting the Transparency Task Force press statement into the chat in case you haven't seen that. And I'm then going to invite Mark Bishop in just a moment to share his exact summary of the situation as he did earlier. Thank you, Mark, for doing it previously. Thank you for what you're about to do. And frankly, thank you for everything you've done around the whole of this matter since the start of it. Mr. Mark Bishop, over to you, sir, for your kind of exec summary. And folks, I've just put the TTF press statement in the chat in case you want to take a look at it. Thank you very much. Cheers, Mark.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to really talk about three routes by which there could be financial recoveries beyond the few pennies you get out of the Linked Fund Solutions deal for the benefit of investors. So the first one of those is an appeal. I mean, Andy's given you a pretty clear indication there. For it to happen, you need one of two things to occur. The first is that the other parties, I should stress I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving you legal advice here, but my opinion is that the other parties involved would agree that they would bear their own costs, win or lose. Looking at the FCA's announcement this afternoon, which could best be described as gloating and misleading, that ain't going to happen. The second one is that the judge decides that because it's a matter of significant public interest, he's going to direct them to bear their own costs. It could happen, but it very rarely does. In reality, it ain't going to happen. So the next option that's available is regulatory. This may happen, this may work, because in their enthusiasm for getting the link scheme through, and yet, in my view, the FCA may have made a bit of a tactical error, because originally what they were saying in essence was this sum of money, 288 million, is what we calculate is the loss caused by Linked Fund Solutions to the investors, and we're close to that, and because it was a disputed sum, that is as close as you can realistically get. That's the end of it. But they did also have to cover off the question of whether they had investigated other types of loss that might have been caused to investors. And of course, the one for which the 288 million was calculated is the amount by which the FCA calculates that the gated investors were worse off than those who left before the gating as a result of their relatively disadvantaged position in terms of illiquid holdings. That's a very, very arcane, very small cause of loss. And so the other cause of loss would be the very obvious departure from the type of investment strategy you would expect from an equity income fund. So buying a load of things that don't produce an income for a start. Unconnected, undisclosed related party transactions would be another one. Overvaluation of illiquid holdings. So there are a number of areas in which there are other causes of loss. Now, you could say that Linked Fund Solutions was responsible as authorised corporate director for stopping the fund manager from doing those things. The FCA, in effect, said no. We considered that, and we decided they weren't responsible for stopping those things because the top documentation of the scheme gave very significant discretion to the fund manager, Woodford Investment Management Limited, to make those decisions on its own behalf. So there was a limited capacity for the authorised corporate director to intervene. Fine, that gets Link off the hook, but it actually puts Woodford Investment Management on the hook. So what they've done is to raise the expectation that they will go against Woodford Investment Management for them having caused the greater part of investors' losses. Now, I'm sure what the FCA will try to do is to say, well, there isn't really enough evidence against those guys. It was nobody's fault, it just happened. But I think that that will be difficult, and there are many courses of action that could be considered. And again, I stress I'm not a lawyer, but a decision by the FCA not to enforce against Woodford Investment Management could be judicially reviewed. There would be a need to crowdfund a six-figure sum to go to judicial review, but that is cheaper than the cost of the adverse costs of an appeal that fails. For the avoidance of doubt, an appeal that fails would not cost you less than $250,000, and it could cost you easily $500,000. So a judicial review that might cost you between $100,000 and $250,000 is something that may be worth considering, particularly because the prize is very much larger. It is a few billion. So that is a course of action that might be worth considering, but better still, I think, would be to try and bully the FCA into doing the right thing. And let's hope it might kind of cave. And the third option you have is political. For the avoidance of doubt, the FCA is independent of government and of Parliament. So it's pointless trying to lobby politicians, write to your MP or whatever, saying, I don't like this decision, please try and change it. It's not going to happen. You're wasting their time and your own. What can happen, though, is that politicians can change the law. That is the one power that they do have. One of the things that they could do would be to change the law that says that the FCA cannot be sued. If that were to happen, I think it would be a slam dunk. There are so many aspects of this case in which the FCA has misled consumers, has failed to perform its statutory duty to a reasonable standard, or indeed at all. So there is a course of action that could be available there, and that is essentially to lobby politicians to change the law so that whether through the complaint scheme or through litigation, people who lose money through regulatory failure can be compensated. The great benefit of going down that route is that you're not alone, because there are 50 or 100 other cases of where the FCA has caused people to lose money through regulatory inaction and incompetence and dishonesty. So that, I think, might be a course of action worth considering as well.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so I've put in the chat so far the TTF press statement, a link to the members of the all-party parliamentary group. I've put that in there because I'm shortly going to share the APPG press statement. But before I do, this 77p in the pound matter keeps coming up. You'll see I've put a note in the chat that basically says the judge didn't seem to really take, now let me get the right phrasing. The judge did not seem convinced that the 77p in the pound narrative was all that significant in terms of the massive vote in favour. That's obviously his prerogative. He's the judge. We may disagree, but I've put in the chat a document that captures the email exchange between TTF during the course of May and June. The document's an email trail, so you kind of need to start at the bottom and work your way up just to get the chronology right. But the email trail basically says, "Dear FCA, we're worried that people might think that when you said 77p in the pound, people think you meant 77p in the pound. Please put something out to stop people getting confused, because the last thing you want is for people to vote for scheme thinking they're going to get 77p in the pound when they're not." We did try hard to do that back in May, June. Mark played an absolutely key part in all that, as he so often does. But unfortunately, we didn't persuade the FCA to take any clarifying action. So I'm kind of sharing that with you just for your information. It did come up in court because Graham Dickinson, who's here with us, did make the point in the court hearing in January that such an attempt had been made. But none of that really seemed to make much of a difference to the outcome. So bear all that in mind. I'll shortly be putting into the chat the APPG's press statement. Most of you won't have read it. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to read it before we kind of move on. So prepare to have a bit of quiet reading time, or go and get a cup of tea sorted if you want. But before we go to that, allow me to just check to see if anybody would like to make a comment or ask me questions based essentially on what Mark has said so far and what I've said so far. Seems everyone's okay. Just wave a hand at me if you want to chip in with something. No, I think we're all good. In which case, I see the question. The questions in the chat, we'll come back to those in a second. I'm now going to try to find the APPG press statement. Frankly, Mark and I and Damien were very, very pleased with the way this press statement came together and the way it was produced and submitted by the parliamentarians. We don't really think it could have been any more potent than it was. And if you look closely, there are some very, very strong lines in it from some of the parliamentarians. I'm just finding it on my computer now, and then I'll put it in the chat. You can have a read of it. I think as press statements from APPG goes, it's about as potent as it can be. We'll spend 2 or 3 minutes just in quiet time, giving everybody a chance to read that. And of course, if you have already read it, because you're here at one of the earlier sessions, you can make yourself a cup of tea or something. I've just taken a look at the tweet that Alex Varley-Winter put in the chat. Thank you, Alex. It's a really nice tweet. I've just retweeted it and invite everybody else to do the same. Thank you very much indeed. So I think it's fair to say, folks, that that's a pretty potent press statement. You may not know all the characters mentioned there, so let me just briefly explain. Bob Blackman is a very senior member of the Conservative Party. Mark, I think I'm right in saying he's deputy chair or vice chair of the 1922 committee. Is that the right phrase? Yeah. Which means he's very popular amongst the backbenchers, and he's a lovely man, by the way. He genuinely is a really nice guy. We get on very, very well with Bob. He's the chairman of the All Party Parliamentary Group, and as you can see from that press statement, he's got quite a bit in there. Lord McNichol is significant. Lord McNichol, who we got to know through Hocker, I'm pleased to see is here. Hocker, one of his friends, Alan Campbell. Lord McNichol submitted a written question in the House of Lords about a week ago, I think it was, basically asking the Treasury whether the government had changed its mind on whether statutory protections in FSMA were now no longer a part of UK national policy. And the reply he got from the Treasury was essentially saying, no, those protections are still part of national policy. Despite that, the FCA has successfully managed to make those once rock solid protections now very, very uncertain. So Lord McNichol is a member of the All Party Parliamentary Group, and very thankfully, very helpfully put that question to the Treasury. Baroness Bowles is a tour de force. She really is an outstanding parliamentarian. Very, very well respected, knows her way around the city very well. I believe I'm right in saying that at one stage she was or may well have been a contender for the Governor of the Bank of England role. Not somebody you mess about with. And you can see her comments in that press statement are very, very strong indeed. She's also a part of a new Lords Committee called the Lords Committee on Financial Services Regulation. And it'll be interesting to see whether that Lords Committee, either through Baroness Bowles or anybody else, chooses to dig into what has been going on with the Woodford scandal and the FCA's handling of it. And the last person mentioned, now Dame Siobhan McDonough, a member of the All Party Parliamentary Group that TGF provided secretariat for, but also, perhaps this is quite significant, she's a member of the Treasury Committee. And it would be lovely from my point of view if the Treasury Committee were to choose to take a look at what's happening with Woodford, because obviously that would help to shine a light on what's been going on. I'm going to share my screen to draw your attention to the important part of an all-party parliamentary group, which is what's called its purpose statement. Every all-party parliamentary group must have a purpose statement. So the all-party parliamentary group that we are the secretariat for has this as its purpose statement. Please take a moment to read it yourselves. It should be big enough to read, I think. And that's been the purpose statement of the APPG since day one. And it won't have escaped your attention that the word regulators is in there to provide, where the service providers or regulators have not delivered or are not delivering excellence and appropriate consumer protection. One, of course, wonders whether the FCA has delivered excellence and appropriate consumer protection in the Woodford case. I certainly personally do not think so at all. You might be inclined to agree. So this Woodford scandal matter is very much part of the APPG's areas of interest, and we are very grateful that the All-Party Parliamentary Group has picked up on this scandal and is going to continue to do what it can to try to help. So there we have it. We've got the hot looks cold. We've got the TTF press statement. We've got the APPG press statement. Later on in the conversation today, we're going to talk about possible next steps in terms of what we can do. But before we go to that, I just want to invite everybody that wants to share any reflections they have. Could I please invite, first of all, the members of the Woodford Warriors, for want of a better phrase, to share the further thoughts. Mr. Ian Duffield, you've been contributing very well throughout the day, and I'm very grateful to you for that. We'll go to Ian next. I'll then go to Anthony Etkin. For those of you that don't know, Anthony is the lead claimant in the Harkers Parker litigation. It's always good to get Anthony's views. And then perhaps we'll go to anybody else and then to Hot. Ian Duffield, please share with us anything you'd like to, as you have done during the course of the other two sessions. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, hi Andy again. For the benefit of the people who are present at this meeting who haven't been at the previous meetings, I'll reiterate what I've said in the earlier meetings. I'm sure I'm as appalled at this situation as all of you are. Disappointing that the judge has come to the decision that he has, but that's the decision he's come to. Unless we have leave to appeal with no adverse costs, which is not likely, as Mark has pointed out, the option of an appeal is probably off the shelf, but that awaits to be seen. The chances of trying to get the FCA to change their mind, given the fact that they have negotiated this arrangement with LFS, is, in my opinion, also a bit unlikely. Therefore, it seems to me that the best recourse that we can do at the moment is to lobby our MPs, which I will be doing. I'll be asking for a meeting with my MP. Fortunately, Lucy Powell, who is my MP, who's also the shadow leader of the House of Commons, did respond very favourably earlier this week. It's sad that it took her so long to reply. Both Andy and I had contacted her, and I'd made several attempts to get her to talk to me. She did come back very late in the day, I'm afraid, but her response was really quite positive, that she is saying she's going to get involved and has sort of pledged a degree of support. So I'll be asking for a meeting with her at a surgery where I can explain the position of myself and my wife, who have a considerable amount of money lost here, in excess of £100,000 between us, of which we're going to get back £9,000 if we're lucky. It'll be somewhere probably between £6,000 and £9,000, and a third of that we've got to hand over to Lee Day for doing absolutely sod all, which is further rubbing salt in the wounds. But it seems to me that's probably at the moment the best course of action we can take as individuals, and that's push Lucy Powell to start making noise and start asking some very searching questions of the FCA's role in all of this. I doubt there's anything she can do in respect of linked fund solutions, but what we do need desperately now from the FCA is the full details of their investigation. They did say at the court hearing there were 2 other investigations underway and declined to comment further than that because they are underway, which is fair. But what we now need is those investigations completing and the results of them to see if there's any movement there. The problem is now, if this approval of the scheme of arrangement stands, it's likely that the FCA will say, regardless of whatever those investigations are, they will stand on a position of saying, but it's been decided by a court, and that's the end of it. But at the moment, that's a course of action I'm going to take. And I think as an individual, that's the best that I can do. Hopefully we can all do something similar to try and make this a a public outrage issue. And if we do that, then we can get the media and the public behind pressure on Parliament. We may be able to get some change to the situation, very much in the same way that public outrage and pressure in respect of the post office scandal did cause changes in the law to be made by Parliament to allow postmasters who'd been convicted unfairly to be able to get their convictions quashed. So that's one course of action that I'm going to be taking. Thank you.
Ian, thank you very much indeed for sharing those thoughts. Thank you. Unless the opportunity can't be secured over the weekend, we're going to try to put together some suggestions that people might want to pick up on if they do want to take action. For example, in relation to engaging with their politicians, that's other MPs. For example, you might want to forward a note to your MP, sharing with them the APPG's press statement and inviting them to let you know whether they do or don't feel comfortable with the decision that's been made in court today. But we'll build on that theme later. Ian, thank you very much indeed. On the general point, of the idea of building support in Parliament, actually I can show you this one. This is the 11th of December letter that the chair of the APPG sent to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury. And it basically says, "Dear Minister, we think there's a train crash about to happen. Please do what you can to avoid it from happening, and perhaps you can do something here." That's basically what the letter says. But the reason I'm sharing it with you is because quite a few parliamentarians actually co-signed it. So the people you're looking at now are all People's MPs, Alex Sobel, Alan Dorans, Alan Smith, etc. So these are all politicians who, Danny Kruger's on the Treasury Committee, by the way. Lovely guy, really lovely guy. These are all politicians who read Bob's letter and supported it, the idea that there ought to be something done about this matter. And of course, as well as these politicians co-signing that letter, there were many others too. These are individuals who aren't Woodford investors, who show their support. So these are people who are not Woodford investors who wanted to show their support. And of course, there's a very, very long list of you folks with the whichever MP is relevant is on the right-hand column. So there was, a huge amount of concern expressed about what was going on. And I guess what we're collectively saying is, let's try to carry on building this momentum and getting a bit of a groundswell of support outside the courts. You never know, it might make some difference to what happens moving forward. We'll talk about other ideas about what we can do as time goes by. But having heard Ian's comments, I'd like to invite, if I may, anybody else to chip in. Anthony, would you be happy? Anthony Edkin, would you be happy to share any thoughts you'd like to, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a lot to add to the thought that appeal without any cost effect is the only real route. I can't give you chapter and verse now. I'm still bound by an NDA, but I can strongly give you the view that judicial review will be a waste of time. If you're even contemplating it, come back to me. I just would hope that maybe the APPG statement and anything else you can get from parliamentarians might just be sufficient to put in front of a judge and say this is a public policy issue. It's not just a local issue, and we should be able to appeal without any adverse costs. I'm interested to hear what Hock's got to say, but I just think, that I've known for a week and a half because I was chair of the committee for Hargus Parker, so I've had time to process it a little bit more. I just don't see any other potential route to overturn it, because by the time anything else has happened, this will all, the scheme would be sanctioned and on its way, and money will be paid out, and it'll be just too late. So either we find a way of appealing without any adverse costs, or everything else is going to be too late, I think.
Anthony, thank you very much. A question just been put in the chat, Anthony, that you may or may not want to respond to. So that's question is, what does Hargus Parker think?
Hargus Parker, you were on a call with them. They think the game's up.
Yeah. So
And that they're not going to get funding. All these cases depend upon funders putting money into the solicitor's pot to pay their costs, and Hargus Parker are not getting funding to take this to appeal. I'm quite sure of that. I don't think that's a big secret.
Anthony, thank you very much indeed. There's some some questions in the chat that Hock may well respond to. Hock, could we please invite you to take yourself off mute? Let everybody know where you are, because not everybody does. It may be some interesting to folk to learn where you are. And please share your reflections on the decision today, what potential next steps there could be. Over to you, Hock. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everyone. Well, it's a sunny morning here in Vancouver. So I'm out. And if you see something buzzing up to the little red thing behind me, there, that'll be, there's one, it's my wife saying there's one there. Hummingbird feeders.
Wow.
We've got hummingbirds around us. So yes, I'm in Vancouver, so it's good morning from Vancouver. First of all, thank you for everyone for their support. I'm really sorry that we haven't managed to persuade the judge to put the scheme sort of down. We knew in December that this was going to be a very difficult tall order, almost before we got the legal guys got started, and then of course the 93% vote made it even more of a mountain. And even back then I was describing it as attempting to blow up the Death Star. So unfortunately it's not that happy ending that we were all hoping for. However, the journey has taught us a number of things, which certainly we're going to put together some grounds for appeal, but the big obstacle is costs. So in essence, we're in a position where the law is now that a scheme of arrangement, which is passed by the requisite majority vote, is able to compromise claims, and as a result, people don't have claims which they can take to the Financial Ombudsman Service to get a fair recompense. And as a result of that, also, they're unable to bring their claims to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, because by definition, a scheme of arrangement ensures that the company itself doesn't default. So it's ironic that the FCA has promoted, after brokered and then promoted this scheme, which is a mechanism typically used in this by bad actors in the financial services industry. So Link are now in the same club as Wonga, Provident Financial, Amigo, all of those people. So it's disappointing. We'll have to take stock with Andy, because the one thing that we can't do as the lawyers is to bet TTF's future on this matter, because TTF itself isn't a creditor, it's not a true party, and it could get hit for very swinging costs if we attempt an appeal and lose. So this is just something we're going to have to work through in the next few days. Damien and I have already been discussing this, and Damien's going to be drafting some papers for that in the next few days. so that Andy and I can discuss it and work out the best next steps. Where does this leave you guys as creditors? I mean, my job was always to come in and see whether I could overturn the scheme of arrangement at the last minute. That was the limit of the job that Andy had asked me to do. I'm not your solicitors pursuing overall claims, but I've already shared with Anthony my thoughts as to where you guys can go next, because by going through this process, we've managed to commit the FCA to its evidence, which is in essence, Link was only ever responsible for £298 million of the overall losses suffered by the fund. And it bore no responsibility for any other losses suffered by you. That means that in the third-party claims covenant that binds you all now as Woodford investors, that might be worthless in the hands of Woodford Investment Management or Northern Trust or any other party that you might choose to pursue, provided you don't pursue them for the first mover advantage losses, but for everything else. Because the FCA have looked at all of this in their wisdom and said, no, none of those other aspects were the fault of Link, which means any Part 20 claim for third-party contribution against Link would by definition fail. And I think you need to ask the questions of your solicitors who you've instructed to say, so is that something that we can go to and get further recompense? Because that might be, there are potentially three battles here. One was against Link, the other two are against Woodford Investment Management, and the third is Northern Trust, who is the depository. Well, losing the battle against one might give you the tools to win the battle against the other two. But I can't judge that, but that's something that I would urge you to ask your solicitors for their advice on. Thank you.
Hock, thank you very, very much indeed, Hock. Folks, those of you who are with the 3 p.m. session will know we did the same thing. We are and always will be forever grateful to Hock and Damien for the work that they've done for us on a completely no strings attached, no agenda, no anything basis. Can I please invite everybody to show up true, genuine support and appreciation for what Hock and Damien have done, and frankly others as well, Mark and many members of the Woodford campaign group who've been working away. But Hock has basically made this a full-time job for the last 2-3 months or so. Hock, thank you very much indeed, in particular to you, sir. Thank you. Hugely, hugely appreciated. There's been a couple of comments in the chat about the Bob to BIM letter that I just showed. I'm going to try to upload it to the chat. It's a really big file. It's massive because of the photos. But I'm trying to upload it now, and hopefully you'll be able to download it at your end before the end of the session. Hock, I believe I'm right in saying, if I could just ask you one specific question, Hock, is it the 23rd of February by the date by which any appeal needs to be applied for? You're on mute, Hock. Pretty sure it is that date.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, Andy.
Thank you.
It's set after the judgment.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, lovely. Very, very good indeed. Mark Bishop put something in the chat that I want to draw your attention to. So again, I'm going to share my screen, folks, because some of you have asked about, what does Bill Matalani think? What does Jeremy Hunt think, etc. Obviously, we don't, we're not mind readers, but there's a clue to where they're coming from here. So on Tuesday, the chair of the APPG, Bob Blackman, CBE MP, asked a question in what's called Treasury Questions. Here it is. The context was the debate about financial services growth. And Bob, who really is a lovely person, Bob asked Bint Athalami, the City Minister, what steps his department is taking to support growth in financial services And Bim Affolami's answer is here. It basically says making reforms to make it easier and better for the industry to grow. But the important thing is how Bob Blackman then followed up, because Bob said, I thank my honourable friend for his answer. But clearly, to grow the financial services industry, investors must have confidence that their money is safe. I've written to him about the Woodford equity scandal, of which there are many thousands of victims across the country. The Financial Conduct Authority refused to intervene. So will he now intervene and take action to ensure that the investors get at least a large part of their money back? So that's what Bob asked. What a great question, and what great reasoning behind it. How can you have the financial sector growing if people can't trust it, is what Bob's saying there. And the response, rather disappointingly, is this. I thank my honourable friend for his question, for writing to me and for standing up for the rights of his constituents. It's important the House knows that over 90% of investors, it's actually quite uncomfortable reading this. It is important that the House knows that over 90% of the investors voted to accept the scheme of arrangement. It is now up to the court to decide whether to approve it, and I therefore will not comment any further. It is important to know that 90% of investors voted to accept the scheme of arrangement. And that's the narrative. The Treasury is saying, you guys wanted this to happen because 90% of the investors voted to accept the scheme of arrangement. That kind of sums it all up, really. Okay, let's go to others that want to chip in with comments and questions. Please wave a hand at me if you do. Looks like we're pretty good. I think most of the people here are people that came to the earlier sessions, but please feel free to wave something at me if you want to come in. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure you all know about our sort of plan of attack, for want of a better phrase, moving forward. So share my screen again.
Andy,
Yes, please do.
it requires a retort, doesn't it? Because it wasn't 90% of investors who thought it was a great scheme. It was 90% of investors who were between a rock and a hard place and thought it was marginally better to take the rock than the hard place. And secondly, it wasn't 90% of investors, it was 90% of the people who voted. It was only a very small proportion of investors. So I think you can run that back at them.
I personally think you've got a very valid point there. Over the weekend, one of the things we might invite you to think about doing, not just you, Anthony, but everybody, is to write to your MP, make your MP aware of the APPG's press statement, perhaps draw your MP's attention to that exchange between Bob Blackman and the City Minister, and make your MP aware that it is a matter of fact that only, I think it was 18%, we'll get the maths, only 18% of people actually voted for the outcome. Therefore, perhaps there's a matter that the City Minister needs to correct the record. So we could well do that, Anthony. We could well do that kind of en masse, as well as a few other things as well that we'll come back to shortly. Thanks, Anthony. Ian, you've got your hand up. Please do share your thought, and then I'll talk to everybody about why we're running Wednesday meetings for Woodford people. Thanks, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the back of what Anthony said, the math from memory, I think, there was about 54,000 or something votes by number, which fits with your recollection, roughly, Andy, of about 18% of the people voted. If we take out of those the block votes that were held by the likes of Hargreaves Lansdown, and I think from memory, the figure was that they had something like 13% of the vote, then we're probably getting down to a figure that is very close to 10 to 15% of the investors actually voted for it, which is substantially less, obviously, than 90% or the 93% that's been kicked around. And maybe if there is an opportunity for grounds of objection, that's a number that maybe it's possible to share with the judge if we get to the point where we are able to raise grounds for an objection, because he sees no reason to overturn, he said in his findings, the 93% vote. But when you start thinking of it being 10 to 15% of the people involved as individual retail investors, because that's the key here, because the likes of Hargreaves Lansdowne have no recourse to the FSCS anyway. It's only private retail investors have recourse to the FSCS. So, you know, we're suddenly getting down into low double digits, very low double digits of people who this is relevant to. And it would have probably been, well, it's maybe reasonable to say for the overall result of the scheme of arrangement, it's fair that larger investors or corporate investors have an opinion or a vote. But to me, then the obvious bit is saying, apart from private retail investors, who should at least have recourse to the FSCS. And that was the amendment that I was personally hoping we would see. I was sort of really expecting the judge was going to find it difficult to not approve against such a large percentage voting, but I was hoping for at least an amendment saying that, however, you cannot remove statutory rights of consumers. So the amendment should have been, but consumers can still go to the FSCS.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. An interesting question has been put in the chat by Derek. Is BIM a Fellaini and the FC in collusion, bearing the reply given? We obviously don't know what conversations have been had between the Treasury and the FCA. I think I'm right in saying, Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, that the FCA is supposed to be completely independent. But Mark, please do come in on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is actually quite an interesting subject. It's definitely true that in law, the FCA is totally independent of government, without a doubt. But of course, it's a bit like Yes Minister, one of those irregular adjectives. I am independent, you are democratically unaccountable, and they are puppets of the city. And really what is happening, I think, is that the supposed independence of the FCA really means that it's not accountable to politicians or to the electorate. But what it means instead is that via the back door, it can be influenced by city interests. And you might speculate that the Treasury is really an extension of the city. It acts in the interests of the city. So Bima Falami, before he was Economic Secretary of the Treasury, he was, to put it bluntly, a city shell. He, for example, narrowly escaped being deselected and was certainly very heavily criticised by the Parliamentary Ombudsman for accepting a £2,000 a month engagement with a lobbying firm, city lobbying firm called WPI Strategy, in return for running an organisation called the Regulatory Reform Group, which basically acted as a front for putting forward policy documents that would make financial regulation even more lax than it is, and therefore benefit city interests. I mean, my personal opinion of the man is he's a scumbag, but he's probably not, he may not be an intentional scumbag. He may be a person whose personal belief is that, you know, the city is one of our great exports and we should do everything we can to make it successful. And if it's successful, it will earn a load of money, which can be taxed and be used to provide schools and hospitals. So he may just be a useful idiot of the city. But what he is, I think, is probably not an obvious friend and ally of consumers. The way in which he's behaving, which is essentially to protect the FCA, which in turn is protecting the FSCS, because if the FSCS levy went through the roof, the industry would be saying we've got to fix or replace this broken regulator. You know, he is effectively protecting the firewall that prevents the bad actors in the industry, particularly the banks, from being made accountable and probably through kind of the costs of misconduct being flushed away. So, you know, you can probably gather I'm not the greatest fan of Bima Falami, and I'm not saying that because I'm some kind of wild-eyed lefty. I'm not. I'm actually a conservative, but I don't see people like him as conservatives, because I believe my version of conservatism is about being on the side of the grafters. You know, the people who work hard and save for themselves and their families. People who set up and run small businesses. That's my type of conservatism. I'm not a corporatist. I don't believe that, this kind of libertarianism for multinationals in the city and serfdom for everybody else. But there is that school of conservatism as well, unfortunately. And sadly, perhaps even worse, there is also that same school of politics within the Labour Party. Look at Blair, look at what's happening now with just in the last week or so, the Labour Party announcing its policies for the city, which were put together, sure enough, by a load of grandees from the city. No consumer representation on that at all. Be under no doubt that if Labour wins, consumer rights and financial services will not be getting better, they will be getting worse. So really, you could argue that perhaps Labour and Conservatives are two cheeks of the same arse, and they're both protecting the city. Perhaps I'm being unduly cynical here, but it is a challenge, I think, trying to make the case for consumers against a very powerful industry.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. This conversation's making me remember something Hock said a couple of weeks ago about ultimately this case is all about deciding who's going to pay for the losses. Is it going to be the city? Is it going to be the investor? Is it going to be the regulator? Hock, I invite you to come in on that point, in just a couple of minutes, but just to give you a bit of notice, allow me to spend a couple of minutes explaining something. So again, those of you who are here at the earlier sessions will have seen this before. But what you're looking at, folks, is a small part of the great big mind map that basically explains what TTF is doing and our different work and so on and so forth. There's a part of this mind map that's about campaigns, as you can see here, and there are two shoots off it. One is the campaigns being led by the Transparency Task Force, and one is the campaigns being led by the APPG, the All Party Parliamentary Group. And the All Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fair Financial Services, whose name has now been abbreviated, thankfully, to the APPG on Fair Financial Services, has these campaigns on the go, which are all about trying to help existing victims. And as you can see, it happens to be the top of the list. There's no particular reason for that. The top of the list is justice for the victims of the Woodford scandal. There are various other scandals the APPG is also interested in, but the one that the APPG has picked up on that I'm making reference to is the Woodford scandal. It's not just the TTF on your side, it's also the APPG on your side as well. And we'll continue to do the best that we can. There's one other aspect of this mind map that I want to share with you, which is to do with our organisation of meetings. Long story short, there are various meetings we have on a daily basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis. There are some meetings we have on a weekly basis. Now, up until now, the Woodford campaign events have only been happening monthly. We're now making that weekly because there's so much going on, and we expect the next few months to be rather fraught with activity on the Woodford campaign front because of all the things we've been discussing. So Wednesdays at 5 o'clock, on the same link, Zoom link you're using now, the Woodford campaign group will be meeting. And we'll use those meetings to obviously exchange ideas, keep each other up to date, share intelligence, etc., etc., etc. Wednesdays, 5 o'clock. Hock, can I please go back to you, please, about this narrative of it's all down to who's going to end up paying the costs, if you'd like to elaborate on that point. Thank you.
Hi, Andy. Well, this takes me back to our conversation a few weeks back about what this is all about. And this is all about the money. Let's be absolutely clear. So we have a situation where Woodford received investments from retail investors. He's created this mess. Those who are meant to be supervising and the guardians watching over this failed to do their job. The guardians of the guardians failed to do their jobs as the regulator to ensure that all the protections that were meant to be in place were actually effective. And the long and short of it is there's a massive black hole that appears. So you then have this problem of who shoulders the loss. And all that's been going on since then is the the machination between various parties to see who actually shoulders the loss. On the one hand, you've got hundreds of thousands of individual investors. You've got the FSCS, which would have to be funded in the short term by the Treasury, and then supplemented as consequence out of industry. And then you got Link itself and the bad actors. But of course, Link doesn't have enough money. But Link, since doing this deal, has sold itself to a Japanese bank, and the Australian shareholders have made I think they sold it at something like a 38% premium on their market value on the day the deal was announced in December. So this is all just a question of who shoulders the loss. And the way this has been maneuvered is the vast majority of the loss is being shouldered by the victims, by the investors. And that's what this is about.
Thank you very much indeed. And of course, one of the consequences of what has just been explained is that potentially, if nothing is done about Woodford and any bad acting that anybody's done, the system just carries on. And we end up with this possibility of an ongoing trail of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, misleading, this, that. Nothing's going to change until eventually there's a sufficient change in the system, which, to speak to what Mark was saying earlier, which requires those who get it wrong, make a mistake, deliberately or otherwise, to pay the consequence of doing so. Until there are consequences for bad actions, there's no incentive to stop acting badly. I'm going to go to Mark to just kind of share his final.
Andy, can I just make one comment on your last point? I mean, talking about bad actors. I mean, this was all done by human beings. It wasn't done by some bot machine that went wrong with an algorithm. This was all done by humans. It's quite interesting. Here we are talking about who shoulders the loss from effects of bad actors, and there hasn't been within the UK system for a long time sort of personal accountability for acts that people have done. So, for instance, the two directors of the ACD in Link are now approved as working in senior positions in Waystone when the business was sold. If I go to something like Wonga, just the other week I looked up two of the directors of Wonga, responsible for the finance director. Wonga, if everyone can remember, went bust because it sold unaffordable loans on an industrial scale to the poorest in society, in breach of regulations, in the face of the FCA. Well, the last finance director of Wonga is currently the finance director of RAC Financial Services. And another director, one of the financial controllers of Wonga, is also director of an insurance underwriting firm. The financial director of an insurance underwriting firm in the City of London. That, to me, kind of says it all. And that is what I think needs to change in the system.
Here, sir. Here. Thank you very much indeed. Mark, in giving us your sort of final comments for tonight, and this is the third session we've had, folks. Thank you all for being with as many of the sessions as you've been able to join us on. Mark, could you just remind everybody of kind of where the Woodford saga sits in the kind of the ancestry, going back to Arch Crew? Just remind everybody about this, because that's the key point here. If the system doesn't change, the probability of this sort of thing just happening again and again and again is really high. Mark, could you please remind everyone of that, and then finish with your final thoughts? Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so what happened was that in 2008, consumers discovered that an open-ended investment scheme called Arch Crew had invested load their money in assets that it shouldn't have done, that those assets were overvalued, that they were illiquid and couldn't be sold at a time when people wanted to redeem their investments. And also, allegedly, because it was been prosecuted, that a load of money was invested in products that were related to the principals against what was said in the information memorandum. So that sounds a little bit familiar. And the authorised corporate director was a company called Capital Financial Managers Limited, which subsequently changed its name to Link Fund Solutions Limited. It is literally the same company under the same leadership. In 2012, a collective investment scheme called the Connaught Income Fund Series 1, which had £120 million in it, 106 million pounds in it of investors' money, ended up with no money in it at all. All of the money had gone. It was supposedly investing in bridging loans to consumers, but in reality, it was property development loans to firms and individuals, and a lot of that was to connected parties and was refinancing previous dodgy loans and increasingly high valuations. And all the money was gone. And the operator of that fund was Capital Financial Managers Limited, now Link Fund Solutions. In both of those cases, the FCA took no action against the firm or its directors because the firm paid some money towards the victims' losses. They were not compensated in full. Ironically, it was the Connaught case in 2012 that brought me into campaigning for financial services consumers. And I well remember sitting with the liquidator of that fund, Jeff Boucher, when we heard that Neil Woodford had set up his own fund management business and was going to use Capital Financial Managers as the authorised corporate director. We both considered investing in it because we wanted to put pension money in. We both realised it was uninvestable at any price because the authorised corporate director could not be trusted. We knew that that fund was likely to collapse. And if we knew it, the FCA sure as hell knew it. And I'll tell you something else really strange. When Connaught blew up, I'm talking about here probably about September of 2012, and I was in contact with the FSA, as it was in those days, trying to sort the thing out. And I went to meet with them about that case. One of the people that I met with there that was supposedly investigating it, and I suspect had been investigating Arch Crew before it, was a gentleman by the name of Chris Martin. Sadly, not the guy from Coldplay, but another Chris Martin entirely. That Chris Martin ended up as the compliance manager of Woodford Investment Management. Now, there are nearly 7 billion people on this planet. And of those 7 billion, perhaps 10 or 20 knew the full extent of what a problem Capital Financial Managers was. What are the odds of one of those ending up as a compliance manager of the firm's biggest client? Close to zero. Was that person put in order to keep a lid on it? I can't prove it, but equally they can't prove that that wasn't what happened.
Mark, thank you very much indeed, sir. Thank you. I'm just going to check if there's any other business from anybody else, then I'll end with a quotation that's often helps me get through the tough days. And there are tough days doing what we do. There really are. Anybody else with any other business before we wrap up? Okay, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your attention, participation, ongoing engagement and support. Sometimes people ask me, why do I do what I do? Because believe me, it ain't easy. And Mark knows this, and all the other campaigners knows this, Hop knows this, we all know this. It isn't easy to stand up rather than just stand by. It really isn't easy. And yes, of course, it's about the injustice of the Woodford case. And we know in our hearts that what's happening here is wrong. We know it's wrong. We may not necessarily be able to articulate why it's wrong from a kind of legal point of view or from a regulatory point of view or from a technical point of view. But that doesn't mean we don't know it is wrong. And with that in mind, I want to share with you a quotation that I sometimes think about, particularly when hesitating about whether to kick up about something or not, whether to speak out about something or not, whether to stand up or just stand by. And it's this. And I personally think this is one of the most powerful, statements ever. And it comes from a time in the late 1960s when there was something special going on in the world, where there was a real sense of optimism and change and progress and fairness. And of course, we know what happened to Robert F. Kennedy and JFK and others of that era. You know, wonderful, wonderful people who had a truly authentic sense of enlightenment about them. And my goodness me, we could do folks like that right now, couldn't we? We really could. Robert F. Kennedy. Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, I'm going to repeat that. When we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt, because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. And I really don't know, folks. I really, really don't know, folks, whether we're going to be able to make a difference. And even if we do make a difference, I don't know whether we're going to make any kind of difference that's going to make any difference to our lives. But there is another generation coming in after us. There's some research out by Transparency International talking about how corrupt the UK is, and other countries too. But the UK is particularly riddled with all kinds of corruption. Some of it's legalized corruption, if you can kind of comprehend that. The TV drama that Derek makes reference to, the post office scandal, has brought everybody to this kind of realization that, my goodness me, there's absolute rot in our system. So I don't know about you, but I do know about me, and that is, I don't want to live in a country like this. And I ain't emigrating. I'm borrowing a lovely quotation from Michael Moore. I don't want to live in a country like this, and I ain't emigrating. I want our country to be great, as I was brought up to believe it to be. And as I've got older, I've realised it's not as great as I thought it was. And sometimes I feel damn well ashamed of things, the kind of things you see on the post office scandal, the kind of things we've been exposed to in terms of the way this regulator has been regulating. It isn't good enough. It isn't good enough. I don't want to live in a country like this, and I'm not going anywhere, and nor do I think of you. And that's why, folks, it's really worth trying to, in some way, fight back and demand justice. It doesn't always feel like it, but we do actually live in a parliamentary democracy. We vote in the people who are in charge. There's an election coming up. Maybe we can get enough politicians to be minded to care about this issue enough. Maybe they'll want to do that off the back of the realization they've had through the post office scandal. Maybe people like Baroness Bowles and Lord McNichol and Dame Siobhan Donor and others, Bob Blackman and CBMP, can help lead the way here. Maybe we can constructively challenge the status quo and say, the judge might have thought that was right, but he's wrong. This isn't right. The rights that you've got as consumers, as citizens, that were in law when you bought the contract, when you bought the Woodford investment, clause 34 or page 34, whatever it was, the prospectus said, you've got these rights. Turns out that was wrong. So either you had the rights and they've been taken wrongfully away from you, or you never had them in the first place. I can't see it being anything other than that. On that note, folks, please keep an eye out for comms moving forward. Wednesdays, 5 o'clock, week in, week out, until we decide there's nothing worth talking about. We'll carry on. In the meantime, can I please invite everybody to put their hands together to applaud ourselves collectively for the effort that's going in and the tenacity that's being shown, and frankly, I'm very proud to be part of this intent to try to make a difference. Have a lovely weekend, folks. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Hop. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alex. Good night, all. Good night. Thank you.